So Prince William just revealed a truth about Diana that the family had known privately but had never spoken about openly, and the reason the royals were left furious is not the truth itself but Camilla's reaction to it. Because when William shared what he shared, when he brought into the open something about Diana that the family had held privately for years, the rest of the royals received it with the gravity it deserved, with the respect for Diana's memory that the truth demanded. But Camilla reacted differently. Camilla reacted in a way that the family experienced as dismissive, as inadequate to the significance of what William had revealed, as failing to show the respect that Diana's memory required. And it was this reaction, this failure to meet the moment with the gravity it demanded, that left the royals furious, not at the truth, at Camilla. Because the truth demanded a response worthy of Diana, and Camilla's response fell devastatingly short. Let me take you into what happened, because the significance is entirely in understanding the gap between what the truth required and what Camilla's reaction provided. To understand why the royals were furious at Camilla's reaction, you first have to understand what William revealed and why it carried such weight. Because the truth William shared was not a scandal, it was not an accusation, it was not a weapon designed to damage anyone, it was something far more powerful than any of those things. It was a truth about Diana's experience within the institution, about what she had endured during her years as Princess of Wales, about the personal cost of a life lived under the pressures that the monarchy had placed on her. And this truth, spoken by Diana's son, carried a weight that demanded the full attention and respect of everyone who heard it. William had held this truth privately for a long time. He had carried it as part of his understanding of his mother's life, as part of the picture he had assembled over the years of who Diana was and what she had experienced. And he had chosen, for reasons known only to him, not to share it openly, to keep it as part of the private knowledge he held about his mother, to carry it alongside all the other things he knew about Diana that the public did not. But at some point, William decided that the truth needed to be spoken, that holding it privately was no longer sufficient, that the family needed to hear it and to reckon with what it meant. And so he shared it, bringing into the open a truth about Diana's experience that changed the family's understanding of what she had endured. Before we go further, real quick, if you are into deep dives on royal stories that actually sit with the complexity instead of just picking a side, hit subscribe and join us here at Crown Watch. We are building something good. Okay, back to it. The truth William revealed concerned the institutional dimension of Diana's suffering, the way the monarchy's structures and expectations had contributed to the difficulties of her life. This is not in itself a new theme. The public has long understood that Diana struggled within the institution, that the pressures of royal life weighed heavily on her, that the constraints of her position contributed to the breakdown of her marriage and to the pain she experienced during her years as Princess of Wales. But William's revelation added specific detail to this understanding, specific knowledge that he had gained from his own relationship with his mother, details that only a son who had been close to Diana during her most difficult years could have possessed. And these details gave the truth a specificity and an emotional force that general knowledge about Diana's struggles could never have carried. The way William shared the truth reflected the emotional weight of what he was disclosing, because William did not present the truth clinically as a set of facts to be assessed. He shared it personally, as a son speaking about his mother, as someone who had carried this knowledge for years and who was now choosing to bring it into the open because he believed it mattered. The personal nature of the disclosure gave it an emotional force that institutional communication could never have matched. William was not merely informing the family of facts they did not know. He was sharing a piece of his mother's story that he had carried alone, inviting the family to understand something about Diana that only he had understood, opening a window into his mother's experience that his private knowledge had kept closed. The family's initial reaction to the truth was one of gravity, of the kind of serious, respectful attention that a significant disclosure about a deceased family member deserves. The royals who were present listened to William with the focus and the care that the moment required, absorbing the truth he was sharing, reckoning with its implications, allowing the weight of what he was saying to settle before responding. This gravity was appropriate because the truth William was sharing deserved it, demanded it, required the full attention and respect of everyone who heard it. And the royals, to their credit, provided that gravity. Meeting the truth with the seriousness it deserved, Camilla did not. And this is where the story turns from the truth itself to the reaction that left the royals furious. Camilla's reaction to the truth William shared was, by the accounts available, inadequate to the moment. Not hostile, not openly dismissive, but insufficient, failing to meet the gravity of the disclosure with the respect and the seriousness it demanded. Camilla's response suggested that she did not fully grasp the significance of what William was sharing, or worse, that she grasped it but chose not to engage with it fully, that she treated the truth about Diana's experience as something less than it was. Her reaction communicated, whether she intended it or not, a failure to honor the weight of Diana's suffering, a failure to meet the moment with the gravity that everyone else in the room had brought to it. The nature of Camilla's inadequate reaction has been described in various ways in the accounts that have circulated. Some describe a response that was too brief, too casual, too lacking in the emotional engagement that the moment required. Others describe a response that deflected rather than engaged, that moved past the truth rather than sitting with it, that treated William's disclosure as something to be managed rather than something to be honored. Whatever the specific form of the reaction, its effect was the same. It communicated to the family that Camilla had not met the moment, that her response to the truth about Diana was insufficient, that she had failed to show the respect that Diana's memory and William's disclosure deserved. The royals' fury at Camilla's reaction reflected the depth of the gap between what the moment required and what Camilla provided, because the truth William had shared demanded a specific kind of response, a response of gravity, of respect, of genuine engagement with the significance of what had been disclosed, and Camilla's failure to provide this response was experienced by the family as a violation of the respect they believed Diana's memory deserved. They were not furious because Camilla had said something wrong. They were furious because she had failed to say something right, because her reaction had not risen to the level that the moment demanded, because the gap between the gravity of the truth and the inadequacy of her response was itself an offense against Diana's memory. This fury was, in a sense, a collective defense of Diana's memory, a united response from the family to a reaction they regarded as failing to honor the weight of her experience. Because whatever the family's internal tensions, whatever the disputes that divide them, the reverence for Diana's memory is something most of them share. William shares it as her son. Catherine shares it as the woman who carries Diana's ring and her legacy forward. Anne shares it as someone who knew Diana and who understands the significance of her experience. Edward shares it as a family member who remembers her and who grieves her loss. And Camilla's failure to match this shared reverence, her inadequate response to a truth that the rest of the family honored with gravity, set her apart from the collective, isolated her from the family's shared feeling, and provoked the fury that isolation always provokes in a family that expects its members to share its most important values. The way the fury expressed itself, by the accounts that have circulated, was not loud or dramatic. It was the quiet, sustained fury of people who have witnessed something they regard as a violation of a shared value. No one shouted at Camilla. No one confronted her directly in the moment. The fury was communicated through the shift in atmosphere, through the way the family's energy changed after Camilla's reaction, through the sudden distance that opened between Camilla and the rest of the room. Those who were present described a moment when the collective feeling of the room shifted, when the gravity that had attended William's disclosure was replaced by attention directed at Camilla, when the family's shared reverence for Diana crystallized into a shared disapproval of the person who had failed to honor it. This quiet fury was, in some ways, more devastating than a loud confrontation would have been, because a confrontation is an engagement, a recognition of the other person's presence and significance. But the quiet shifting of the room's energy was something closer to a withdrawal, a pulling away, a collective decision to stop engaging with the person who had disappointed them. Camilla found herself, in the aftermath of her inadequate reaction, isolated within the room, surrounded by people whose shared feelings she had failed to match, aware of the distance that had opened between herself and the rest of the family. This isolation was not imposed through any explicit act. It emerged naturally from the gap between Camilla's reaction and the family's expectations, a gap that the collective feeling of the room made palpable and inescapable. For Camilla, the experience of this isolation must have been acutely painful, because Camilla is not unaware. She understands the family's dynamics. She recognizes when she has fallen short of expectations, and the recognition that her reaction to William's disclosure had failed to meet the moment, that the family's shared feeling had turned against her, that she was isolated within a room full of the people whose acceptance she has spent decades working to earn, must have been one of the most difficult experiences of her time within the institution. The isolation was a kind of judgment, communicated not through words, but through the withdrawal of the collective feeling that had, for a moment, united the rest of the family. And Camilla, sitting within that judgment, understood its weight. Charles's position in the aftermath of Camilla's reaction was once again agonizing, because Charles was caught between his solidarity with the family's reverence for Diana and his loyalty to the wife whose reaction had provoked the family's fury. Charles shared the family's feeling about Diana. He understood the significance of the truth William had revealed, and he recognized that Camilla's reaction had been inadequate, that she had failed to meet the moment with the gravity it required. But he was also Camilla's husband, bound to her by love and by commitment, unwilling to abandon her entirely, even when her reaction had disappointed him and infuriated the rest of the family. Charles was left, as he so often is, trying to hold together his loyalty to Camilla and his solidarity with the family's shared values, unable to fully satisfy either, trapped in the impossible space between the woman he chose and the memory of the woman he lost. The difficulty of Charles's position was deepened by the recognition that the family's fury at Camilla was, in a sense, justified, because Charles shared the family's reverence for Diana, and he recognized that Camilla's reaction had fallen short of what that reverence demanded. He could not defend Camilla's inadequate response without seeming to endorse the inadequacy, without appearing to suggest that Diana's memory did not deserve the gravity the rest of the family had shown. And so Charles was left without a defense, caught between his loyalty to his wife and his recognition that her reaction had been wrong, unable to protect her without compromising his own reverence for Diana. Catherine's reaction to Camilla's inadequate response reflected her own deep engagement with Diana's legacy, because Catherine had listened to William's truth with the gravity it deserved, had honored the disclosure with the seriousness and the respect that the rest of the family had shown, and Camilla's failure to match this response was, for Catherine, a failure that touched on something personal, on the way Catherine understands her own obligation to Diana's memory, on the seriousness with which she approaches her role as the bearer of Diana's ring and the continuator of Diana's legacy. Catherine's reaction to Camilla's inadequacy was not dramatic. It was the quiet, firm disapproval of a person who had met the moment with the appropriate gravity and who was disappointed that someone else had not. The deeper significance of the family's fury at Camilla's reaction lies in what it reveals about the standards the family holds for engagement with Diana's memory, because the fury was not merely a response to a single inadequate reaction. It was an expression of a standard, an expectation about how Diana's memory should be treated, about the gravity and the respect that any engagement with her legacy requires. The family holds this standard because Diana's memory is sacred to them, because her suffering was real and deserves to be honored, because the truth of her experience demands engagement rather than deflection. And Camilla's failure to meet this standard, her inadequate reaction to the truth William had shared, violated the standard in a way that the family could not accept. Princess Anne's reaction to Camilla's inadequacy was characteristically one of quiet but firm disapproval, because Anne holds particularly strong views about the appropriate way to engage with the family's most significant moments, about the gravity that important disclosures deserve, about the respect that should be shown to the memories of those who have suffered. And Camilla's failure to show this respect, her inadequate engagement with the truth about Diana, violated Anne's sense of what the moment required. Anne did not express her disapproval loudly. She did not need to. Her silence, her bearing, the way she carried herself in the aftermath of Camilla's reaction communicated her judgment clearly to anyone who knew how to read it. Anne was disappointed, and her disappointment carried the weight that Anne's judgments always carry. Edward, characteristically, felt both the fury at Camilla's reaction and the compassion for her position, because Edward understood that Camilla's relationship with Diana's memory was different from everyone else's, that Camilla experienced Diana not as a mother or a sister-in-law or a family member, but as a predecessor whose shadow she could never escape. And Edward recognized that this different relationship might explain, if not excuse, the inadequacy of Camilla's reaction, that Camilla's failure to meet the moment might reflect not a lack of respect, but the difficulty of engaging fully with the memory of a woman whose legacy was a source of permanent pain for her. Edward's understanding did not prevent his disappointment at Camilla's reaction, but it tempered it with a compassion that some of the other family members did not share. There is a question worth raising about whether the family's standard for engagement with Diana's memory is one that Camilla can ever fully meet, because the family's reverence for Diana is, for most of its members, personal, rooted in genuine love and genuine grief, flowing from a direct relationship with the woman herself. Camilla does not share this personal connection. Her relationship with Diana's memory is mediated by guilt, by comparison, by the shadow that Diana's legacy casts over her own position. And the question is whether someone in Camilla's position, someone whose relationship with Diana's memory is defined by these complicating factors, can ever fully meet the standard of reverence that the family expects. Can Camilla honor Diana's memory with the same gravity that Diana's son shows? Can she engage with the truth of Diana's experience with the same seriousness that Diana's sister-in-law brings? Or is the standard the family holds one that Camilla's position makes it impossible for her to meet? A standard that demands a personal reverence she cannot authentically feel. This question does not excuse Camilla's inadequate reaction. The truth William shared deserved gravity, and Camilla's response failed to provide it. But the question suggests that the gap between what the family expects and what Camilla can provide may be a permanent one, a gap that reflects not Camilla's lack of character, but the impossibility of her position. Camilla cannot revere Diana the way the family reveres her, because Camilla's relationship with Diana's memory is fundamentally different from theirs. And the recognition of this difference, the understanding that the gap may be permanent, adds a layer of tragedy to the family's fury, the tragedy of a family that expects something from one of its members that the member's circumstances may make it impossible to provide. The aftermath of the incident carried consequences that extended beyond the immediate fury, because the family's reaction to Camilla's inadequacy established with renewed clarity the standard that the family holds for engagement with Diana's memory. The standard is high. It demands genuine gravity, genuine respect, genuine engagement with the significance of Diana's experience. And anyone who falls short of this standard, anyone whose reaction fails to meet the gravity the moment requires, will face the collective fury of a family that regards Diana's memory as sacred. Camilla had now experienced this fury firsthand, had felt the isolation that came from failing to meet the standard, had absorbed the weight of the family's collective disapproval. And this experience would shape her future engagement with Diana's memory, would constrain her, would remind her that any failure to show the appropriate gravity would provoke the same reaction she had just endured. Whether this constraint will produce more authentic engagement from Camilla or merely a more careful performance of it is a question that only time will answer. Because there is a difference between genuine reverence and performed reverence, between authentically meeting the standard and merely appearing to meet it. The family's fury may produce in Camilla a more careful management of her reactions to Diana's memory, a more disciplined performance of the gravity the family expects. But whether this performance will reflect genuine feeling or merely the desire to avoid the isolation her inadequate reaction produced is something that no observer can determine from the outside. The family may get the appearance of reverence without its substance, the performance of gravity without its reality, and whether this is sufficient, whether performed reverence satisfies the standard the family holds, is itself a question that the incident raises but does not resolve. William, in the aftermath of the incident, was reportedly left with a complicated set of feelings because he had achieved what he sought. He had shared the truth about Diana that he believed needed to be shared. The family had received it with the gravity it deserved, and Camilla's inadequate reaction had been met with the collective fury that William believed it warranted. But the incident had also deepened the tensions within the family, had isolated Camilla further, had placed Charles in yet another impossible position. And William, who cares about the family's cohesion even as he insists on the protection of Diana's memory, recognized that the incident had come at a cost to the family's peace, to Charles's marriage, to the relationships that hold the institution together. William does not regret sharing the truth, but he recognizes the cost of having shared it, the disruption it caused, the pain it produced, and this recognition adds a dimension of complexity to his satisfaction, an awareness that the protection of Diana's memory, however justified, carries consequences for the family that the protector must absorb. So here is what I want you to sit with. Was the family's fury at Camilla's reaction justified, a legitimate response to an inadequate engagement with a truth that deserved gravity and respect?